I used to think betrayal had a smell, something you could sense before it hit. Turns out it's invisible until it's already drained your bank account. One morning, I logged into our joint savings and saw the number drop like a guillotine. Daniel didn't even flinch. He said it was for family. His family. I smiled. I didn't scream, because screaming doesn't change contracts or ownership. Quietly, I moved my pieces, and by the time he realized the keys to our dream house were in my hand, the deed in my name, he was already locked outside. I used to think we were building something together, piece by piece, like laying bricks for a future we could touch. Daniel called it our crypto fund, a joint account we poured every spare dollar into. We'd sit at the kitchen table on Sunday mornings, coffee in hand, watching the numbers on the screen climb like we were riding a private elevator to freedom. Every uptick felt like proof we were a team. I let myself believe in that harmony, even when tiny shadows began to creep into the edges of our life. It started small. Him turning the laptop screen away when I walked into the room, clearing his browser history before bed. At first, I brushed it off. He was just being private, maybe embarrassed about a bad trade. But then I noticed he had stopped updating me about the fund altogether. The same man who used to message me about a $200 gain now barely mentioned it. My gut stirred, but my heart told it to quiet down. One Tuesday night, I walked into the living room to find Daniel hunched over his laptop. The only light came from the screen, glowing cold against his face. I caught a glimpse of a number, a withdrawal, $50,000 gone in a single click. He slammed the laptop shut when he saw me. "It's for family," he said, his voice too casual. "Sophie needed help." Sophie, his sister who couldn't keep a business afloat if someone handed her a life raft. I smiled tightly, pretending to accept the explanation, but my pulse was pounding. 50,000 wasn't a loan. It was a breach. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, wondering if the harmony I'd believed in was nothing more than a mirage I'd built in my own head. The next morning, while Daniel was at work, I opened my laptop and began digging. Our crypto wallet was public. Blockchain doesn't lie. I followed the transaction trail, line by line, block by block. There it was, the $50K transfer landing neatly into a wallet address I didn't recognize. It didn't take long to confirm. It was Sophie's. My stomach dropped. It wasn't just one transfer. I scrolled back and saw smaller amounts like breadcrumbs moving from our wallet to hers over the past 3 months. And then I saw something else, an active smart contract. Daniel had coded it to send a fixed amount to Sophie's wallet automatically every month. I sat frozen in my chair, my coffee untouched, heart pounding in my ears. This wasn't a one-time bailout, it was a pipeline. He had built a mechanism to drain us slowly, steadily, without my knowledge or consent. That evening, I watched him over dinner. He laughed at some story about his day, chewing steak as if nothing in the world was amiss. I forced myself to smile, to nod, to play the role of the oblivious wife. My hands stayed steady as I cut my food, but inside I was mapping every step forward. Later that night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat in the dark with my laptop. I pulled up the smart contract again, reading the code line by line. I wasn't a programmer, but I understood enough to see the danger. Every 30 days, another slice of our savings would vanish. My chest tightened. If I didn't act, the account would be bled dry within the year. And then I saw it. Another new transaction pending. A fresh line of code Daniel had added that day, designed to increase the payout. The number was bold, uncompromising, like he'd grown bolder with each withdrawal. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen casting shadows across the walls. My reflection in the black edges of the monitor looked like someone I barely recognized, calm, still, but with eyes sharp enough to cut glass. Daniel had no idea I'd seen this. He thought he was playing a game he could win. He didn't know the game had just changed. I woke up the next morning to the sound of Daniel making coffee. His voice drifted from the kitchen, humming some old tune, like nothing in the world was wrong. I stepped out, wrapped in my robe, smiling as if my trust in him hadn't just been shattered. "How's the portfolio looking today?" I asked, as casually as someone might comment on the weather. My voice was light, neutral, practiced. He looked up, surprised, then relaxed. "Good, steady, I'm managing it," he said, sliding a cup toward me. I took a sip, hiding the fact that every word tasted like ash. Inside, I was still at 6. My chest still felt like a hollow vault, but I needed him to believe nothing had changed. So I played my part, asking about the market, nodding when he explained trends, pretending to be impressed. Over the next few days, I perfected the act. We discussed Bitcoin's latest fluctuations over dinner. We joked about retiring early as if we hadn't just lost 50 grand to his sister's bottomless pit. My smiles were weapons now, each one designed to keep him comfortable, unguarded. Then one evening, he brought it up. "Hey, I've been thinking," Daniel began, leaning casually against the counter. "Since we're investing so much together, maybe we should look at moving some of the other assets into joint ownership. It's just easier that way." My heart paused for half a beat, then settled into a steady rhythm. On the outside, I was still Rachel, the cooperative wife. "That makes sense," I said smoothly. "I trust you." He smiled, reassured. That was my micro cliffhanger, the moment he believed I was still under his control. But while he thought I was signing away security, I was quietly building my own fortress. The next day, I called an old friend from college, now a well-known blockchain consultant. Over coffee, I explained the situation, careful with my words, but clear enough for her to understand the urgency. She didn't ask many questions. She just got to work. Within 48 hours, I had my own wallet, a multi-sig setup that required my sole authorization to move funds. Layers of encryption, private keys stored offline, no fingerprints left for anyone to find. But I didn't stop there. I hired a fintech attorney to quietly review every agreement Daniel had ever asked me to sign. Buried in the fine print, we found small escape hatches, clauses that would let me move certain funds into my name under specific conditions. Conditions Daniel had already triggered by making unauthorized withdrawals. That knowledge was a weapon. My confidence began to rise, from 4 to +1. Not because the situation was fixed, but because I finally had the tools to fix it. Late one night, after Daniel had gone to bed, I sat in the dim light of the living room with my laptop open. My fingers hovered over the keys as I transferred the first batch of crypto into my cold wallet. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen, feeling the tension coil tighter with each passing second. When it finished, I disconnected the wallet and placed it in a safe I'd bought earlier that day, a small, heavy thing tucked behind a false panel in my closet. Over the next week, I moved more, careful, measured amounts that wouldn't trigger suspicion. By the time I was done, the majority of the high-value assets were mine alone. Daniel still believed he had everything under control. He still checked the portfolio with the same smug grin, oblivious to the fact that the numbers on his screen were a shadow of what they once were. He didn't know that the real wealth was locked away where he couldn't touch it. That was my major cliffhanger, a fortune in crypto, sitting under my name, quietly out of reach, while Daniel went to bed each night believing he still held all the power. I'd learned something valuable in the weeks of pretending. People who think they're in control stop looking over their shoulder. Daniel believed he had the perfect setup, assets under his management, a wife who trusted him, and a sister who owed him gratitude. What he didn't realize was that every smile I gave him, every nod of agreement, was laying the foundation for my next move. One Friday morning, over coffee, I slid a folder across the table. "I've been thinking," I began, my voice even, "about formalizing how we handle the crypto portfolio. You know, something more official for taxes, a joint investment fund, just us." Daniel's eyes lit up. The idea of control dressed as cooperation was like honey to him. He didn't know the contract had been crafted by my fintech attorney, buried with clauses so precise they could cut glass. In bold letters, it named us both as partners. But deep in the legal marrow, it made one thing clear. Any unauthorized transfer outside the fund would forfeit his decision-making rights. That clause wasn't hypothetical. He'd already violated it several times. He didn't read past the first page. He never did. He signed it with the same flourish he used for dinner receipts, then handed the pen back to me with a satisfied grin. I smiled, matching his. Inside, my emotions shifted, from the chill of betrayal to the warm hum of confidence. For the first time in months, I wasn't just reacting. I was orchestrating. That night, I opened my laptop in the quiet of our bedroom, the glow illuminating my face as I saved the signed contract. I placed it in my secure drive, triple encrypted. This was my insurance. A week later, I made my next move. There's a private network, invite only, where fintech insiders share data that never reaches the public. With a few strategic connections from my blockchain consultant, I gained access. And I had the perfect piece of bait. I uploaded proof of every unauthorized transfer from our joint fund to Sophie's wallet. Dates, amounts, the smart contract code that tied Daniel to the withdrawals. I didn't use my name. I didn't need to. The numbers spoke for themselves. Within days, whispers began. Small posts, curious threads. Then the chatter grew louder. Screenshots spread. Soon, it wasn't just anonymous traders talking. It was influencers, financial analysts, the kind of people who live to pick apart other people's scandals. Daniel didn't notice at first. He was too busy checking numbers he thought he controlled. But then the texts started. Friends asking strange questions. Colleagues growing distant. His phone calls became curt, his shoulders tense. When the first fintech blog published the story, he finally realized the walls were closing in. I watched him pace in the kitchen, muttering to himself. Phone pressed to his ear. He was calling Sophie, I guessed, or maybe someone who could make the noise go away. But this wasn't noise, this was a storm, and I had guided every wind. The scandal picked up speed. Daniel's name appeared in threads alongside words like misappropriation and fraud. Screenshots of the smart contract circulated, annotated by strangers who knew exactly what they were looking at. I felt my emotions peak at .6, not from revenge, but from the sheer precision of execution. For once, I wasn't the victim, I was the architect. And then, just when I thought the game was mine, the phone rang. It was Linda. Her voice was cold, clipped, every word measured like she was already in a courtroom. "Rachel," she said, "we need to talk. I'm filing a suit against you." I let the silence hang for a moment, my fingers tightening on the edge of the counter. I'd expected pushback from Daniel, maybe even Sophie. But Linda? She was the queen on this chessboard, the piece that had stayed still until now. "Interesting," I said finally, my voice steady. "I'll see you there." Major cliffhanger. Linda Morgan, attorney and matriarch, had just declared war. I invited Linda to my workspace under the guise of wanting to resolve things privately. She agreed, but her tone was more obligation than curiosity. When she stepped into the converted spare room, now a makeshift studio lined with soft lighting and a mounted camera, her eyes narrowed. She recognized the setup. Live stream ready, professionally lit, nothing casual about it. "Why are we recording?" she asked, already irritated. "For transparency," I said. "Something your family's been lacking." She took a seat across from me, stiff and coiled. I tapped a key, and the screen behind me flickered to life. One by one, I brought up the documents, the original joint wallet agreement, the unauthorized transfers, the modified smart contracts, and, most damning of all, the digital fingerprint tying the documents back to her. "You drafted these," I said calmly. "Legal counsel with access to fintech encryption tools. You masked Daniel's activity and buried clauses meant to shield your family from liability." Her face held, for a moment. Then I opened one last file, a time-stamped email she'd sent to Daniel 3 months ago. "Make sure Rachel doesn't see this version," it read. That cracked her. She blinked once. Her jaw flexed, then loosened. Her hands, perfectly manicured, clutched the chair arms. "Where did you get that?" "Same place I got the rest," I replied. "I've been backing up every device I touch since the day your son transferred 50 grand without a word." Her silence was louder than denial. Her control, long held and unshaken, was slipping. I saw it in her posture, in the way she stopped looking me in the eyes. Emotionally, I was at +7, poised, powerful, fully aware of what this moment meant. "You could have come to me," she said, voice brittle. "I did," I replied. "You just didn't know it was a trap." For a heartbeat, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low and sharp. "Daniel will fix this, and you'll walk away with something clean. That's the only way this ends." Even in retreat, she was bargaining. That was her tell. She'd lost. But she wasn't done. Major cliffhanger. She stood, smoothed her blazer, and said, "Tell him to follow the family plan or he'll lose more than just crypto." And then she left. I stared at the closed door for a long minute. I didn't shake. I didn't doubt. I saved the recording, encrypted it, and emailed a copy to my attorney. The next day, I made everything public. Through my secure profile on the same fintech network, I posted the full breakdown: timestamps, signatures, contracts, code. No anonymity this time. I used my real name. The story wasn't just about crypto fraud anymore. It was about coercion, financial abuse, and digital manipulation. I called it what it was: systematic breakdown. At first, there was backlash. Linda's friends in legal circles tried to discredit the data, but blockchain doesn't lie. For every accusation, I posted receipts, code hashes, witness statements, encrypted proof. And then the tide turned. Financial journalists picked up the story. Online forums dissected the contracts line by line. Headlines followed: "Crypto Queen takes down FinTech Dynasty." "Wife outsmarts digital theft with blockchain precision." Daniel tried to call. I didn't answer. Linda sent a cease and desist. My attorney laughed and filed a counterclaim with full documentation. Then came the final blow: a state investigation into the shell company Sophie had been running. Turns out, the money Daniel sent wasn't used to restart anything. It was funneled into accounts overseas, money laundering, tax evasion. And so, they began to unravel. I watched from my office, news headlines glowing on my second monitor, while sipping tea in silence. Emotionally, there was a dip, a moment at one when Linda threatened legal escalation. But it didn't last. When the subpoenas hit and the IRS started pulling files, I felt the emotion rise again, surging to +8. Control was no longer theoretical, it was legal, it was public. And then came the summons. Sophie, Daniel's ever-fragile sister, was called back from whatever rural retreat she'd vanished into. I saw her name on the court notice. She was coming, and she wasn't coming empty-handed. The morning after Sophie's return, I found myself standing in front of the mirror longer than usual. The woman staring back at me wore confidence like armor: sharp blazer, polished eyes, steady breath. But beneath it, I saw the cracks. Not failure. Just wear. Fatigue clung to my collarbones. For months, I'd been in constant motion, building, uncovering, defending. And now that the pieces were finally falling into place, silence filled the spaces where rage had lived. There was no audience in this reflection, no camera, no live stream, just me. And I looked like a woman who had won the war but lost her voice somewhere in the fight. I traced the edge of the mirror with my fingertip, not quite sure what I was looking for. Validation, forgiveness, maybe just someone to say, "You were right to fight this way." My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered on instinct. "Rachel." I froze. That voice hadn't touched my ears in almost 8 years. "Ethan?" He laughed gently, as if surprised I remembered. "Didn't think you'd pick up. I saw the story. I didn't realize you'd become, well, a legend." I didn't respond. My throat tightened unexpectedly. "I'm in town. If you want to talk. No pressure." He texted an address, then hung up. I stared at the message for a full minute. Ethan had been a kind of home once, stable, warm, unthreatening. We parted on good terms, mostly because we both wanted different versions of ambition. Seeing him now meant opening a door, and I wasn't sure what I'd find behind it. By noon, I was still undecided. I poured coffee, stared out the window, and wondered if the fortress I'd built around myself was protection or prison. That night, I walked past the cafe twice before finally going in. Ethan was already there, hands folded, smile hesitant. "You look like someone who's been through hell," he said. I laughed despite myself. "You're not wrong." We talked for hours about blockchain, law, betrayal, control. He didn't offer pity, just presence. It was strange how grounding that could feel. As I left, he touched my elbow. "You don't have to be at war forever, Rach." Major cliffhanger. I went home not knowing whether I would see him again, but knowing that I could. And that choice terrified me more than any lawsuit. The next morning, chaos hit. Sophie held a press conference. I watched it live, standing in my kitchen, hands clenched around a mug that had long gone cold. She smiled for the cameras, her tone syrupy sweet. "It's easy to spin a narrative," she said. But the truth? Rachel had her own private crypto accounts for years. She built this campaign to distract from her own misconduct. Screenshots flashed across the screen, selectively edited documents showing my early portfolio, transfers to anonymous wallets, and chats taken out of context. "This isn't about justice," she said. "It's a personal brand, a performance." And just like that, the tide turned, comment sections filled with doubt. "Simbi Crypto Queen" trended alongside Dr. Crypto Liar. I watched my credibility bleed out in real time. Emotionally, I dropped to 5. For the first time since this began, I considered logging off completely, letting the noise fade. But that wasn't who I'd become, so I went live. No graphics, no script, just me in a chair, under the same soft lights I'd used to expose Linda. "My name is Rachel Morgan," I began. "I was married to a man who stole from me. I stayed quiet while his family tried to erase me. I fought back with silence, with precision, and with truth." I showed the full records, unaltered, contextualized. I admitted to managing my own funds, but clarified the timelines and intent. I spoke not just as a victim or a strategist, but as a woman who had refused to disappear. "This isn't about damage control," I said, voice steady. "This is about owning the full story, all of it, even the parts that don't look good on a headline." I paused, looked directly into the lens. I didn't just fight to get my money back. I fought to get my life back. Major cliffhanger. And now, the world had to decide if they were ready to see what a woman does after she stops asking for permission. In the weeks following my live stream, the noise didn't stop. It shifted. The accusations began to lose momentum, replaced by questions, curious, cautious, but more open than before. Messages poured into my inbox, women asking for advice, strangers thanking me for showing them it was possible to take control, even when the odds were stacked. I sat at my desk one morning, cold wallet in hand, turning it over like a talisman. That piece of encrypted metal had started as my shield, my weapon. Now it felt more like a key. I opened my laptop and moved a portion of my holdings into a new account. This wasn't for protection or survival anymore. It was for building. I registered the name Phoenix Fund, a financial support platform designed to help women learn blockchain, secure their assets, and gain independence. The seed money was mine, directly from the crypto Daniel once thought he controlled. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The first few weeks were messy. Lawyers to finalize the structure, accountants to navigate the regulations, but each step felt lighter than anything I'd done before. There was no opponent this time, just a vision I couldn't shake. My emotions hovered at +9. This wasn't vengeance anymore. This was transformation. Then came the email. It was from a major financial institution, one whose name had been whispered through every conference I'd ever attended. They wanted to partner, capital investment, advisory roles, even global expansion. It was the kind of offer people build their entire careers hoping to receive. I read it 3 times, then I closed it. Not because I didn't want the growth, but because I wanted to make sure this wouldn't become another deal where someone else quietly rewrote the rules. I had built Phoenix Fund on my own terms, and I wasn't ready to hand the keys to someone who might turn it into a marketing trophy. Major cliffhanger. I typed a polite response, thanking them for their interest, and ended it with, "Not yet, not no, just not yet." The invitation for the Empower Women with Crypto event came together faster than I expected. Word traveled through fintech circles, feminist networks, even mainstream media. By the night of the event, the venue was full, rows of women, journalists, industry leaders, and more cameras than I could count. Backstage, I adjusted my microphone, my reflection staring back from the dressing room mirror. This time, there were no cracks, no fatigue hiding under my skin. My hair was pulled back, my eyes steady, my voice ready. When they called my name, the applause was a low, warm wave. I stepped onto the stage, the lights hot on my face, and looked out over the crowd. I started from the beginning, not the legal battles or the contracts, but the nights when I'd stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of betrayal settle into my bones. I talked about how silence can be both prison and strategy, and how fear can be redirected into fuel. I didn't win because I knew more about blockchain than Daniel, I said. I won because I refused to let the silence swallow me. I walked the audience through the Phoenix Fund's purpose, not just to protect assets, but to give women the tools to never have to rely on anyone else's permission to control their financial future. The room stayed quiet, but not in the way that feels empty. It was the kind of quiet where every single person is holding on to the words, waiting for the next one. My emotions rose to +10, not because I had erased the past, but because I was standing in a room full of people who could change their own futures. Toward the end of my speech, I paused. I was married to a man who thought money was power, and for a long time I believed him. But power isn't in the numbers on a screen or the names on a contract. Power is in knowing you can walk away and still be whole. The applause was immediate, heavy, resonant. As the camera zoomed in, I caught sight of a red light blinking on the front row's main lens. It reminded me of the night I'd first gone live to defend myself. This time, the audience wasn't hostile. They were mine. Nuance. The story had ended, but something much bigger had begun. The Phoenix Fund was already gaining traction. Women from cities I'd never visited were signing up for workshops, webinars, and consultations. I looked straight into the main camera, the room fading slightly in my peripheral vision. "This story," I said slowly, "is only the beginning." Final cliffhanger. The crowd erupted into applause as I stepped back, leaving the stage not as someone who had simply survived betrayal, but as someone who had rewritten the rules entirely.